Hello everyone, my name is Corazar, and welcome to episode 0 of the Vintage Story Guide Season 2. Wait a minute, Corazar. We're back at Lupine Ridge. You said we were going to have a different world for Season 2. Well, that is correct, but some people had requested in episode 0 to cover things like how to mod your game, how to start a new game, what the different world settings mean, and so on, and that's what we're going to do today. So I've done some tinkering in the 1.18 world settings, I've done some research, and I've also been testing mods to make sure that they work with 1.18 before I put together the actual full series. So this is actually happening, well, 1.18.1 is out. It came out, I think, yesterday, but I am still in the throes of getting the rest of the series ready to go. And so today, let's go ahead and back out. We're going to fire up 1.18.1, and we're going to create a new world, maybe several of them, and we're going to go over how to set your worlds up for maximum success and maximum fun. And so with that being said, let's get to it. Alright everyone, here we are in the new 1.18.1 Vintage Story title screen, and the first thing you'll see is that the background here is a different pattern to it, but it is all aesthetic. Now, if you are playing a single-player game, you are of course going to want to go into the single-player menu, but I do recommend going through your settings to just make sure that everything looks right as far as your graphics card goes, as far as your mouse preferences go, as far as your controls go, and yes, those of you who are returning from last season may recall that I am a lefty and I use a different keyboard layout, so my WASD are quite different. I personally like to have sprint toggled on and off with the key rather than having to hold it down, and I also like to keep my mouse modifiers locked to sneak and sprint. Check your sound levels. If you like playing with music, turn it up. I end up putting music in afterwards so that I don't have jumps in the music and weird cuts and things, so I have music off. And check your interface. If you want to play without the minimap or any of the other helpful things, you can turn those off in here. And if you're feeling dangerous, you can turn on developer mode and turn on these things if you want. I don't recommend it unless you are just testing for bugs. Now, if you're going to be playing with mods, I do generally recommend that you start by adding those mods first, especially if they are block-based mods, things that add new blocks to the game, new colors, and new items. Those are all best added before you start your first single-player world. So you'll see here we have a blank slate to start with. So let's take a break and we're going to go talk about how to do mods real quick before we actually start with the world. So the first thing you want to do for mods is you need to come over to mods.vintagestory.at in your browser, and you will be faced with this page here that shows the first 10, most recent 10 mods that the database has. To get to the full list, you can either click the all mods here or the list of mods link right here, and you can search for and find whatever mods you want. There are mods that add new tools, new blocks, new uses for blocks, new play styles, new classes, new monsters, changes to monsters, all kinds of things. Now I have a specific mod list, and for instance I'm going to go and get Carry On mod, and we're going to grab this, and when you click on the mod you can then come over to the files, or you can download the latest version here, but on the files it'll show you which game version they're compatible with. Now I actually probably have to update a couple of the mods because I've been playing with some of the RC based mods, and you can use the one-click mod install. However, I have seen reports in the bug tracker of some people having issues with the one-click mod installer as well as the auto updater, so I am personally staying away from this for now. I may come back to it in the future. So once you have your mods wherever they're downloaded from, or two specifically, we have a mod, Carry On 1.18 version 1 in our downloads folder, and we're going to open another folder by hitting the start menu and going to %appdata%. Now this is of course only for players using Windows. If you're on Linux, you're on your own. I don't know Linux, so unfortunately I can't help you there, but there is going to be a folder just like this where you have Vintage Story and Vintage Story Data somewhere in your Linux user folder structure. Now, there are two places technically where you can drop your mods. One is in Vintage Story Data Mods. I don't put my mods here. If you put them here, they don't show up in the mod manager in the game. The place that I put mods is in Vintage Story, Mods. You'll see here we have the whole list of mods. I'm going to remove this older carry-on version, and I'm going to put this one in here instead. And that's how you mod. Very simple. You do want to leave your mods in their zip archives. You do not want to extract them. Just put the whole zip file in the mod folder and you're good. And do not delete these mods here. While these show up as mods, these are actually what you need in order to play the game, because the game's content is actually several mods on top of the game engine. Now, while we're here, and I realize this doesn't have to do with modding or the game itself, but there is a setting you'll want to change if you are playing on especially a laptop, but also a desktop if your desktop has both a dedicated GPU and a CPU with a built-in GPU. If you have a powerful graphics card and you fire up Vintage Story and it runs at like 20 frames per second, then you'll definitely want to check this out. Hit your Windows key or press the Start menu and start typing Graphics Settings. And go to this option right here. And in this list here, you will see maybe a couple different items, or maybe even nothing if you haven't changed any settings here. But you're going to want to add the Vintage Story client and make sure that you set Windows to use your high-performance graphics card. So if you don't know where to find Vintage Story or how to add it, you're going to click this Browse button here, going to click into this address bar here, and once again type %appdata%, hit enter, and you'll be in the same folder we were looking at before, but in this file dialog here. All you have to do is go into Vintage Story, and then double-click on the Vintage Story executable right here, or click on it once and click Add. Now, I've already done that here, and this is mine right here. Once you've done that, it'll show up here, but it will default to Let Windows Decide. You want to change that to High Performance, and it'll say whatever your GPU is here. Mine, for instance, is the AMD Radeon RX 6800M. Save it, and you should be good. Okay, so now that we are back in the game here, we have our mods in our folder, we can go to the mod manager, and this is where I said that if you put them in your Vintage Story data mods folder, they won't show up here. And I don't know why. I think they're supposed to. Now, if you're playing on a server, the server will have its mods installed on the server, most of them, and you won't need to do anything. Now, some mods are client-side only, mods such as HUD Clock and Prospector Info. These you will need installed on your own machine if you want to have them available to you in a server. And the server, as I understand, really can't stop you from adding client-side mods, so you can use them alongside the server mods even if the server doesn't normally have those mods installed. Now in here you can toggle these on and off. If you start up your game and you get an error, if you trace the error back to the name of a mod, you may need to come and turn the mods off if they're not compatible with your version of the game, or if they're incompatible with other mods. For instance, I tried to start up with Branch Cutter and Wearable Light, and both of these crashed my game, so I have them here to remind me to update them and keep an eye on them for future changes to see if they're more compatible. Otherwise, I'm going to leave them off for now. So, to start our game, we're going to slide over into Single Player, and we're going to spend some time tinkering with new worlds. We're going to create a new world. Now, we can, if we want, just start from here. This is the basic world creation. You'll get a randomized seed. The seed is a random number that sort of determines a lot, but not everything about how your world is generated. It pertains mostly to the stone types, the land formation, the amount and location of plant coverage and fertility, but it doesn't determine things like the exact location of trees, the exact location and type of traders, or the exact location and contents of ruins. The default standard playstyle here is what we'll be playing in the Vintage Story Guide series. So if you're going to be playing along, I do recommend the standard survival experience. We will be making some changes, so keep an eye out for episode 1 when I go through and customize our world to change it to suit our needs. If you want a somewhat easier start to the game, you can choose the exploration default. It gives you a nice long grace timer before monsters appear. You can keep your inventory contents when you die. It gives it more generous. Basically everything is a bit more generous. Wilderness survival is if you like games like Green Hell and you like pain. This will basically respawn you in a wide random area whenever you die. You can still get back to your home if you want to, if you have a home. It just makes it a lot harder to survive because you can be moved up to 5 kilometers away from where you died. The Homo sapiens, which is still experimental, is a different kind of experience. It is new to version 1.18, and it is based around you being the only person in the world. So there are no ruins, there are no traders, there is no trace of human or seraph activity at all in the world. This also has some of the same kind of difficult settings as Wilderness Survival, especially in regard to when you die, you respawn in a very, very, very random location. It should be noted that both Wilderness Survival and the Homo sapiens playstyles have the world map and coordinate overlays turned off permanently by default. So if you want that challenge, go for it. If not, you may want to customize your settings first. Creative building is the last playstyle here. This is not a challenge style, this is for basically just creatively building a world. And it is a sort of super flat, completely nothing but grass blocks world, and you can go in there and build whatever you want with all the tools and all the blocks that you want, including ones you can't normally get in survival. For our educational purposes today, we're going to stick with the standard survival world. We're going to customize it. You can customize a great many things. I'll go through all these and kind of what they do. I don't understand all of them perfectly, but I'll give you enough of an idea so that you can tinker with it and build the world that you want to live in your Vintage Story playthrough. First, of course, is the playstyle. This is the same as the previous menu. You have the world height. If you have a very powerful machine, you can increase the world height up to 1,536 blocks. That is enormous. I'm going to stick with 256, but what this does is it will either multiply or divide, basically, the height of the terrain. So while you'll get similar terrain, it'll be either magnified or minified in the same locations that they are already. The world seed is, as I said, the number that determines a lot about the game's layout, or the world's layout specifically. It is optional here because if you leave it blank, the game will generate a random number for you. But if you have a specific seed that you want, because you've seen it on someone's playthrough, or you've been looking for Vintage Story seeds online and people are posting them, then you might want to start with a particular seed. Today, we're going to go with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the same combination as my luggage. And we're going to come back to this seed because we're going to make several worlds based on this seed with some of the different options available to us here. You can set your game mode between survival and creative. Survival is that you can take damage, you have a breath meter, you have sanity, you have to work for every block that you get. Creative is where you can fly around and you're invincible and invisible, and you can just build your heart's content. We're going to be working in creative for the time being, just so we can showcase how the worlds work. But in general, if you're playing the game for a challenging experience, you'll want survival. You can choose your starting climate. The default is temperate. I find temperate to be a little colder than where I live in the real world. I live in a temperate climate, but 6 to 14 Celsius is actually pretty cool. And in-game, I have started in areas that are as low as -6 Celsius on May 1st. So this I find to be a little bit inaccurate sometimes. But you can choose from temperate to hot, where it is 28 to 32 Celsius, or down to icy at -15 to -10 Celsius. We're going to start with temperate for now. We can leave the respawn radius alone if you want the challenging experience of being put somewhere completely random whenever you die. You can pick a much higher number from this drop-down. Your grace timer determines how long you have before monsters appear, monsters being primarily drifters. I don't know if this affects wolves and bears. I know there was supposed to be a timer for wolves and bears, but I don't see it anywhere in here anymore. The death punishment determines what happens to you when you die, specifically what happens to your inventory. Your options are pretty black and white. You can either drop all your inventory contents, including your backpacks, or you can keep them. Now, if you have a mod that changes how your deaths work, like if you have the gravestones mod or the corpse mod, then that may override what happens here. By default, seasons are enabled. That means that you will have seasons that progress from spring through winter and then back to spring. You can, however, change it to be off and choose a specific season to always be in. You also can choose how many lives you have as a player. Whether you want to have a normal experience of respawning whenever you die, or if you want to play a hardcore version, you can give yourself 1 through 20 lives. Your lung capacity determines how long you can stay underwater. It defaults to 40 seconds, but can be as low as 10 seconds or as high as 60 minutes. You can also choose the days per month. There are 12 months in every year, in-game, and you can choose how many days are in them, and it will tell you how many real-life hours it takes to progress, as long as you don't mess with the time setting in-game. You may also decide whether you want to have true winters enabled or disabled. This means that crops will wither and die in winter. If it's disabled, you'll have sort of milder winters. The block gravity lets you determine whether or not dirt is included in the types of blocks that can fall. I typically leave it on sand and gravel because it is the default for most playstyles, and it also impacts performance when you have lots of dirt piles that like to slide around. Allowing underground farming lets you build your farms underground. If you leave this off, then when you farm underground, there's a certain penalty that is assessed on the light level that applies to your plants. And below, I think, 19 meters underground, you will never be able to farm crops at all. Body temperature hardiness determines how much resistance you have to getting cold. The higher and lower you go, the more and less resistance you have to cold temperatures. Hot temperatures are not currently implemented in the game as being dangerous, but it may happen in the future. Creature hostility applies to wolves, drifters, and locusts, and you can determine whether they attack you on sight, whether they only attack you if you attack them first, or if they never attack you at all. Their strength determines how much damage they deal to you, and you can crank it up to 400% or wind it down to 25%. The next three determine your stats, how much health you have starting. This can be modified by your starting class. Your hunger rate, again, this can also be modified by your starting class, and how quickly you walk. I will caution you that faster walk speeds do make it easier to accidentally fall off of cliffs and things. Ask me how I know. Your food spoilage rate determines how quickly or slowly food spoils in your world, and you can change that once again between 25% to 400%. Tree sapling growth time determines how fast trees grow. I personally recommend changing it from the default, which is somewhat slower, to normal. Especially for things like a Let's Play, normal just makes things flow a lot better when you don't have to wait 80 days for a redwood to grow. Tool durability and tool mining speed are pretty self-explanatory. They determine how many hits your tools can take on whatever they're mining, and your tool mining speed is how fast they actually do the mining. The ProPick node search radius is finally implemented by default in the game, and it is set to 6 blocks. This is in the secondary mode of the ProPick, where you're looking for ores that are in the area. This tells you exactly whether or not there are ores in this specific area. Now, the default is 6 blocks. I personally recommend 8. It really helps things. The global deposit spawn rate determines basically how many ore deposits are in your world. I have not tinkered with this a whole lot, but you can crank it up to 300% or as low as 20%. Microblock chiseling. If you are big into detail work, then you are going to enjoy the chisel. If you already play Vintage Story, then you're going to love this as well. But you can either turn off the chiseling feature, which I think is not wise. The default is stone, wood, and bricks, but you can also change it to enable you to chisel most cubic blocks. I like to turn this on because there are some blocks and some colors that you can't otherwise work into a chiseling build without this setting on. Things like different sand colors and even dirt, you cannot normally chisel. With this on, you can. The coordinate overlay and the world map are both settings you can turn on and off. If you turn them off here, you won't have the option to turn them on in the game. You can also turn on or off the lore content. This is the game's story, as well as the bits of lore like the books and scrolls you can find around the world. The temporal stability settings determine how you interact with the temporal stability feature in the game. There are temporal storms, which are sort of big, scary storms that summon lots of monsters, and the default setting is that they will occur every 10 to 20 days, and they slowly increase in strength each time, capped at plus 100% strength. You can change these down as far as off, or have them basically every week, maybe twice a week, if you want. Don't recommend. The storm length lasts about 5 in-game hours, which is about 10-ish minutes long. I don't really recommend changing this to be much longer unless you really want to spend time farming them, because you can get some decent goodies from them, but I don't find it to be that useful all the time. You may also toggle on or off the temporal stability feature. There are areas in the world of low temporal stability, and these will slowly cause you to go insane and see bad guys that aren't there, and they'll kill you. But it is an integral part of the game, and I do recommend keeping it on for the challenge. Temporal rifts. Oh, my friends. Temporal rifts are blobby things that appear on the surface of the world, and they come and go, depending on the temporal weather, and that is a thing. And you have a couple options here. You can either turn them off entirely, which, personally, I would do this if I wasn't doing a Let's Play, because they are annoying, they get in the way, they show up in your living room or in your pigsty, and then you can't go and do anything in that area until it goes away. You can make them go away with light, but if you're early enough in the game, you might not have that option. You can make them invisible, where they still exist, but they don't actually impact your temporal stability. And they don't make sound, which is kind of important, because they're very noisy. They will still cause drifters to spawn during temporal weather, so it is good for a challenge when you want to have the challenge, but not the annoyance. The default is visible, where they are big and brown and swirly, and they make lots of trumpety noises, and they're very sad. And if you get too close to them, they make you go crazy and die. You may also tinker with the temporal gear respawn uses here, the default being 20 uses. When you use a temporal gear to set your spawn point, this determines how many times you can use that spawn point after dying before it resets your spawn point to the world spawn. You may also toggle on or off the sleeping during temporal storms. If you leave this off and you try to sleep during a temporal storm, it will not let you. If you allow it, then you can actually sleep through the storm and basically skip most of the storm's effects. In the world generation area, you get to determine how your world is generated. This affects mostly the land and climate and the size of the world. Your climate distribution options are realistic or patchy. Realistic being that the farther north you go of the equator, the colder it gets. The closer to the equator you are, the warmer it gets, and the farther south you go from the equator, the colder it gets again. With patchy, you get different patchy areas of climate similar to a different block game you may have heard of. I will warn you that having a patchy climate distribution will not protect you from the effects of being far north or south of the equator. Namely, you might have a jungle that gets down to -10 in winter. This will kill all of the native fruit trees. The land cover scale, upheaval rate, misspelled, and geologic activity are all new to 1.18. The land cover determines how much of the world should be land, with the rest being ocean. The defaults here are 100%, 100%, and 40%. And the default land appearance in Vintage Story is mostly land with some lakes. If you lower this percentage to, say, 60%, you'll typically have a 60% amount of land and 40% oceans. Now, oceans are salt water, and that is actually a different thing than freshwater in this game, so you do want to be careful about that. The land cover scale works with the land cover itself to determine how much ocean will be between pieces of land, as it says in the tooltip. You can change this as low as 10% and as high as 400%. The upheaval rate that you set will determine basically how hilly your terrain is, specifically with smoother hills, not the purl and noise generation of the crazy mountains that Vintage Story has. The geologic activity setting determines how often you will find the hot springs on the surface, as well as how often you will find lava underneath. The world width and world length determine how large your world is. You can pick from a large number of selections here, down to as small as a single chunk if you want to. And the world edge setting determines whether you can fall off the world if you go too far, or if you are prevented from doing so. The polar equator distance determines how many blocks you have to travel from the equator, where it's hottest and where you have basically no seasons, to the pole areas. Now, in a 1 million block world, a polar equator distance of 100,000 blocks is actually kind of small, so we're basically on a snowball planet, interestingly. The global temperature and precipitation determine what the sort of baseline temperature is for the world, as well as how much rain the world gets. Now, there are different areas of temperature and precipitation by default in these worlds, so you will see variation, and it is possible to be closer to the equator in some places and have a lower temperature than a place slightly farther north. The forestation and shrubs determines how much forest there is. The surface copper and surface tin deposit frequencies determine how often you will find copper and tin as surface ores. These are independent of the ores determined by the setting up here, if I can find it, right here. These are ores that spawn separately from that on the surface for getting you into the game as a new player. Lastly, in this section, we have snow melt and accumulation. This determines whether or not snow melts and accumulates during the winter. It does have an impact on your CPU. If you have a very slow CPU, you may want to turn this off. Lastly, we have multiplayer settings. If you are playing single player, then these two will do basically nothing for you. However, this one, the class exclusive recipes, determines whether or not certain recipes are locked to specific classes. And if you are not of that class, you won't be able to make those recipes. So things like the special bows that the hunter can make, or the special sword and shield of a blackguard, or basically all of the clothes for the tailor. I personally, if you're playing single player, recommend turning this off, just so you can experience all the different options the game has to offer. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a new world with our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seed, and we're going to leave all the settings regarding world generation at their defaults. We're going to hit apply. We're going to call this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 default. And once you are logged into the world for the very first time, you will see that the game now actually fully pauses. Everything stops moving, and the world actually even stops generating while you're in this menu. This is where you create your character. You can pick all different kinds of skin tones, hair tones, eye colors, all that kind of stuff. It does randomize your appearance at first. You may also choose your voice type and your voice pitch. If you couldn't tell, they're all very annoying. Once you picked your skin, move on to your class. Here is where you can scroll through the classes and see all the different classes and their drawbacks and perks. The Commoner is probably the easiest to get into if you are a new player. It has no perks or drawbacks. The Hunter is a fast character. They can run around real fast. They get a lot of resources from harvesting animals. And they are great at ranged combat and terrible at melee combat. The Malefactor is sort of a sneaky, steely kind of person. They're great for looting ruins because they get more loot from ruins. They are, however, very weak in combat. The Clockmaker is a mechanically minded character. They are good with technical things. They get bonuses on dealing damage against locusts and other mechanical creatures. They also get the ability to repair certain in-game lore-based items at a significant discount, and they're also quick, but they are relatively bad at both ranged and melee damage. The Blackguard is the character you want to play if you want to be a tough, rough foot soldier. You are very tough and you hit hard, plus 30% melee damage, which means with a top-tier sword you can two-shot most low-level drifters. They are quicker in heavier armor, and they are fast miners. However, they're very hungry, and they are bad at range damage, and they actually get a lot less loot when foraging, harvesting, and looting. You can even sometimes get no loot from things like resin on trees. And lastly, we have the Tailor. They are designed basically around making and using clothing and armor, and they are relatively weak overall. They get less loot for foraging, they are not so great in melee combat because of their weaker health, and they are not good at harvesting animals. We're going to go as a commoner because we're in creative, so it doesn't matter right now. And whoopsie, I accidentally put this world on patchy, so we're going to make a new one and load that in this time. Okay, with the actual correct settings in place now, we are now in a brand new world. You'll see it kind of spawned us pretty high up in a mountain. We're at Y159, and this is a pretty inhospitable start, honestly. Unless there's like a really easy way down somewhere. But it's fine, we can fly, we're in creative mode. So this is the world of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, with basically everything else set to the default. So we spawn in this sort of granite mountain area. Looks like we have some granite sand over here. We have a trader over here. And yeah, this is what it looks like. So you're going to see a lot of land. You'll see small ponds and lakes. And this is what the world looks like with all the land cover set to its default amount. I'm going to speed up my move speed here by turning up with F2. And we're going to go and take a look at this trader, who's probably a luxuries goods trader, judging by the acacia. Hello. So take note of this character here. This is a luxuries goods trader. They sell pricey things, mostly decorations, but also some good armor. What we're going to do is we're going to make another world very shortly, and we're going to come back here, and I'm going to show you that the seed does not determine what goes here. When we start up the world with a different seed, there's a good chance that we will not have wrote the luxuries trader right here. We might have somebody else. But there will usually be a trader in roughly the same spot in each world from the same seed. Okay, we're going to go back to single player. We're going to make a new world. We're going to call this one 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 default 2. I'm going to customize seed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, same as my luggage. Apply, and it'll create the world. And you'll see here, we haven't even spawned in the same location. We're basically just a few blocks away. I think we spawned right about here last time on the map. But yes, there is a somewhat randomized respawn area, and it can change depending on the game's mood, apparently. Let's get up here, and we're going to go and take a look at this trader again, although I think they might be another luxuries goods trader. Interesting. That's unusual, but it does happen. So we're in basically the same world. The trees and things will not be in the exact same locations. There will be the same amount of coverage in each location, but in the other world, this pine tree probably wasn't right here next to this maple tree and this maple tree. So if you're looking for exact replicas, you're going to have to copy the world rather than just creating a new world with the same seed. So that is the lesson in creating worlds from the same seeds. Let's go ahead and see what happens when we tinker with some of the land cover options. So here we are with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to set this to creative. And we're going to do the land cover and set it to, say, 60%. And we'll do land cover scale of, we'll leave it at 100%. And we'll leave the upheaval rate alone for now. We just want to do the land cover. Let's apply. We're going to create the world. So here we are in the same world, same seed, but different land coverage rate. And you'll see that these mountains are basically the same. They're maybe not exact, or maybe they are. Look at that. We have the same sort of pattern here recognized. This is where we spawned before. But now look. Wherever the land was higher, we now have land, and wherever it was lower, we now have water. And these oceans can be quite large. As you can see, we have just a couple little tiny islands out here, rife for a survival challenge, I guess, for real masochists. But yes, so changing the water amount with the same seed will keep most of your pearl and noise-based generation as far as mountains go, but anywhere where the terrain is lower, it will tend to prefer adding in oceans. You will still find areas of flat land here and there, but they're going to be a bit less common because they're taken over by water mostly. So let's see what happens if we set the land coverage to, say, 10%. Okay, so here we are. Again, we're in the same mountain range, or near enough the same. This looks a little bit different now. And you'll see, if we zip out here and increase our speed again, that the amount of land we have is actually even less than before. Although this spot over here seems to be pretty well preserved, which I do find interesting. But if we were to sail off in this direction, we probably wouldn't find land for quite a long time. So yep, we've gone this far, and we have no more land so far. We can keep going and keep going forever, and we might never run into land technically. But as you can see, we now have a giant ocean to, well, explore, but there really isn't much here. And here we go. Some little islands sticking out of the ocean. So here's a neat little place you could stumble upon in your maritime wanderings. Ooh, with some exposed lead, not too shabby. But yes, that is the effect of the land cover amount. You can see here we have lots of water and not a whole lot of land. So, what do the other settings do? Let's go find out. So here we are with my luggage combo again, creative mode, and we are going to slide down here, change land cover back to 60%, and so we've seen that already, and we're going to change the scale down to 10%. So let's see what that looks like. So here we are once again in the, similar mountains. They're a bit different this time, as you can see, and here we now have a sort of channel where there used to be land, right over here. This mountainous area used to connect to this little area over here, and this area was much larger and a bit flatter. And now we have this sort of stringy island. As you can see, what lowering that percentage does is it kind of tries to more closely spread out everything so that you have a more consistent amount of water between each island, and notably a smaller amount of water. So you'll basically always be somewhere where you can see land as long as you're on another piece of land. Very much a water world with islands kind of playthrough if you wanted to do that. What about upheaval though? Let's take a look at that. We're going to leave our land cover and scale at 100%, and this time we're going to max out our upheaval. And we are back in a familiar setting now. Right over here we have our good buddy, who seems to be less affected by the randomness of the... Oh, you're two-tongued now. Still luxuries, though. Very interesting. So as you can see, right in the immediate area, we don't have that much different going on. But the farther we go out, we might start to see areas of more upheaval, in which case we should see rolling hills kind of like this. This might be partly the normal generation from Vintage Story, but this is a very nice smooth hill, which tells me this is probably from the upheaval. But the more upheaval you have, the more sort of rolling hills you get. And the less upheaval you have, the fewer rolling hills, and the more of the spiky stuff that you get. This is more typical of traditional Vintage Story land generation. This is the Perlin noise generator. And this is done separately from the upheaval rate. Here we go. Here is a good example of what is probably related to upheaval, is that we have this nice smooth mountain here, and it is mixed in with some of the Perlin noise generation, so you get the upheaval but also the sort of spiky, stripy mountains. But yeah, that is about it for episode 0. I hope you took away something educational from this. I had a lot of questions about how to generate worlds and how to do mods, and this pretty much covers it. Anyway, I hope you're looking forward to the pilot episode of the new season, and I hope you'll stick around for the season. As always, my name has been Corazar. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.